In 2007, I was living in San Francisco working for an organization called MoveOn.org when my boss, Eli Pariser, called to say a guy was coming to town who he wanted me to meet. Eli told me his name was Jeremy, and he wanted to start a progressive alternative to AIPAC. I was intrigued and a bit nervous. Now, nervous may sound like a strange adjective for someone who had been as out there in the social change world as I had been. By that time in my career, I had done battle with big banks over environmental standards, marched in countless anti-war protests, and sent emails to literally millions of people opposing most of President Bush's agenda. Nervous was not synonymous with me exploring new social change projects, but this was different. For years, I had tamped down and tried to ignore how my progressive politics were diverging from my relationship I had with my Judaism and with Israel as a Jewish state. I had been raised in a solidly AIPAC family, and while my parents gamely rolled with my evolution as an activist, questioning AIPAC's lock on the Jewish perspective on Israel remained a no-go zone around the family dinner table, and if I was honest, in my own mind. And then on the other side were progressive allies who had a reasonable critique of a hardline approach towards Middle East peace, and what I believed to be a far less reasonable critique and more one-dimensional antipathy towards the country I loved and understood to be a symbol of hope in a world of anti-Semitism. I had no safe space in this festering debate, and so I chose to withdraw until this call. A week later, Jeremy and I meandered easily and aimlessly around the Embarcadero in what started to feel more like a therapy than a strategy session. I nodded as he told me of his concern that Jews were locked into a paradigm that didn't properly express our collective values, and his vision that there be a healthy debate, more voices at the table, and a more robust affirmation for people like us who wanted to hold peace, human rights, and our Jewish identity and affinity for Israel in simultaneous harmony. All of a sudden, I felt the visceral burden of years of holding my progressive politics in one hand and my Israeli politics in another. I knew this thing he was talking about, this idea, must happen. Entrepreneurs say the best ideas are the most simple. They answer a question that has been irritating people for years, and that's certainly true for J Street. It was obvious from the very first conference 1 year later that Jeremy had tapped a vein ready to explode. I came to speak to the J Street U students about the elements of activism and organizing, and there was so much excitement, so much energy, you could feel the air crackling around you. But it wasn't just the students, the multiple generations that filled that first conference, not just to witness or to learn, but to participate, demonstrated that this was an idea whose time had come. Not without pushback, mind you. Personally, for me, from family members who saw my name all the way across the country on the speaking roster, and professionally for Jeremy, who had to repeat relentlessly his unimpeachable credentials to be able to even start to voice his vision. Still, it's too simple to suggest that Jeremy just filled a slot and anyone could have done the same. And in fact, one of my favorite stories to chide Jeremy about is his early insistence that he was just setting this thing up and then he was going to hand it off to someone else. I smiled and nodded and indulged my new friend, even though it was 100% apparent, even at that time, that this was Jeremy's calling, that J Street needed Jeremy to become all it could be. These jobs are hard. Long days, time away from family, tiny steps forward with what feel like giant steps backwards. Upsetting the status quo is rarely something people line up to thank you for. The infrequent affirmations that come from a newly organized group of people can be steamrolled immediately by entrenched interests aligned to undercut you. Every opportunity, every crisis can take on a magnified quality, making the person in the hot seat feel completely irreplaceable all the time. But Jeremy has balanced the demands of work with being present for his family and friends in a way completely unique to this town. Jeremy returned phone calls, lent ears dispensed advice with his typical humor and incisiveness. Jeremy's movement leadership is defined by his combination of enormous strategic acumen and his profound sense of humanity. This has never been a game to Jeremy. Sure, he's in it to win it, but winning is more than a single vote count, greater than the sum of any one election cycle, and tops having the last word with a political foe. Jeremy reminds us that what draws us together transcends a political fight. It's a soulful quest. That peace, that justice, that Jewishness is messy and beautiful and requires a perfect combination of moral direction and strategic flexibility. The past 10 years would have been the furthest thing from easy, even if we lived in normal times, and we don't live in normal times. But through it all, the enduring leadership of Jeremy and J Street has built something so special. Look around this room 10 years later. Allow yourself to feel it. We're not simply a political force, although we are that. We're not simply an advocacy organization, although we are undeniably one of the most powerful. J Street is a home, a peace of mind, and a peace of heart for so many like me that were searching silently before we even knew we were searching for harmony in our values and in our lives. Jeremy, tonight we honor you for building this home.
The origin of J Street is in the aftermath of the 2004 presidential election and the firestorm that erupted around the presidential candidate I was working for, Howard Dean.
Jeremy was one of the really critical public policy people in the campaign who, of course, was diverted after I said that our relationships should be even-handed between the Israelis and the Palestinians, which I still believe.
There was a firestorm of opposition from within both the mainstream of the Jewish community and also political circles in Washington, D.C., and there was nobody to stand up and support Governor Dean.
But afterwards, I think Jeremy felt inspired by the notion that you had to stand up for what you believed in, that politics is not enough if you don't have a spine.
The premise of J Street is to make the case that the majority of Jewish Americans understand that to be pro-Israel is to play a balanced role that is necessary in order to help resolve this conflict.
J Street is responding to a political problem, not a policy problem. I think what was important with the arrival of J Street was to make sure that those friends that we had in the Congress understood our perspective on American foreign policy.
J Street provides people a voice and an opportunity to know and understand the country and to know what our role as the United States is vis-a-vis Israel. I think what J Street provided for members here in Congress and for our communities is a different political home. It's one that's open to a range of views. And I always believe that the bigger the tent, the better we are.
J Street's ability to influence policy and rhetoric on Capitol Hill has come about because of the organizational ability of a lot of good people who are committed to Israel, but at the same time committed to a peace that they feel is durable. J Street played a very important role in helping many senators and congressmen to understand the importance of the Iran deal. And I'll never forget the full-page advertisement in the New York Times that appeared after the agreement, because J Street put it there. Today, as we're celebrating 10 years of J Street, Iran cannot make a nuclear bomb. J Street understands that for Israel to be strong and protected long into the future, Israel must make peace.
I first found J Street U at our student involvement fair. I saw their little booth that said pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, pro-peace, and my mind was just blown. Growing up, I didn't feel like I knew enough about Israel, knew enough about the conflict to really say anything, and everything just felt not only polarized, but inaccessible. J Street U has influenced my college experience more than I anticipated. I had no idea how much I was gonna just fall head over heels into this organization. I'm ready to step into the world and really make a change the way that I want to see my politics manifested in the world because of J Street U.
People are hungry for what J Street has offered the American Jewish community. There has been this mistaken sense that to be pro-Israel means that you love and support Israel and therefore would never criticize Israeli policy under any circumstances. J Street gave an entire population of American Jews permission to stay in the Israel conversation, to bring our heart, our soul, our intellect, our core commitments, and I think that has had a tremendous impact.
I'm with J Street because I believe in and want a better future for Israel.
I am with J Street because ethics and activism.
I'm with J Street because I believe in a two-state solution.
I'm with J Street because it's effective.
I'm with J Street because of my Jewish values.
Foreign policy vision centered around diplomacy,
integrity and courage.
Jewish and American values.
J Street is, I think, a wonderful organization dedicated to the important proposition that being pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian are not mutually exclusive.
My message is how proud we should be in what J Street has achieved over this last decade, how proud we are of the important role that J Street plays, and how proud we should be of J Street's future, because J Street's most important work is really ahead of us, not behind us.
Please join me in welcoming my friend and our leader, Jeremy Ben-Ami.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What an incredible evening, what an incredible few days, what an incredible 10 years. About 10 and a half years ago, I told my wife, Eliza, I'm thinking about quitting my job and giving this crazy idea of starting a new organization a try. I said to her, I can't tell you it's going to work. I don't really have a plan B, and I'll probably be pretty unemployable. What do you think? And since that moment, and for the last decade, in fact, for the overwhelming majority of our marriage and for my kids' lives, this endeavor has been at the center of my life and by extension, their lives. Truth be told, it's probably had a greater impact on their lives than mine. The stress, the anxiety, the personal pressure, they're always felt a lot more by the family. So if there's anyone here tonight who deserves gratitude and recognition, it's my wife, Eliza, and my wonderful children, Shira and Ari. I also want to take this opportunity to thank from the bottom of my heart the incredible people who have made this organization possible. They're the members of our board, like Mort Halperin, Carol Winograd, Victor Kovner, I know you're up here somewhere. Some of the folks who couldn't be with us tonight, like Davide Guillot, who was there from the very beginning, Alex Stanton. There are people like Daniel Levy, Matt Dorff, Jim Gerstein. They were all part of the brainstorming from day one a dozen years ago. They're the staff, the incredible staff of this organization. You know, it's hard to believe that we put together our first alumni listserv of the staff in advance of this conference. It has over 100 people. Combined with the 70 who work for us, that's nearly 200 people who've been part of making this organization possible. I particularly want to thank Rachel Lerner, Jessica Rosenblum, that's right, Steve Krubener, Dan Kalick,
Dylan Williams, Adee Tellem, Kate Press, and Rachel Eisner. They have all worked here as long as I have, basically. And there's really no way to adequately thank all of the chapter leaders and the advocacy coordinators, the members of our rabbinic cabinet, the incredible J Street U activists. But this 10th anniversary, it's a moment for all of you, for all of us, to step back and appreciate what we have built and all that we have achieved over the past decade. But those of you who know me well undoubtedly know that this moment of appreciation of what's been done is going to be brief. Because this is a moment of dire crisis for the United States, for Israel, and for the Jewish people. It's a moment on when we need to focus on what still needs to be done. It's a moment that cries out for action. In the United States, we see what I believe is the gravest threat in my lifetime to the greatest system of government the world has ever known in the form of Donald Trump and the horrific impact he has had on the politics of this nation. And similarly, in Israel, we face a threat to the 2,000-year dream of reestablishing a state that serves as the national homeland of the Jewish people. It's a dream that motivated my great-grandparents to travel from the Pale of Jewish settlement in Russia in the 1880s to settle and build a home in the land of their ancestors. It's a dream that motivated my grandparents 100 years ago to buy a piece of a sand dune north of Jaffa in order to build a modern city that today is Tel Aviv. It's the dream. Let's hear it for Tel Aviv. It's the dream for which my father and my father-in-law, who is here with us today, fought in 1948 and for which their friends and their families gave their lives. It's a dream, and it is a reality today that is threatened by the policies of the government of Israel led by Bibi Netanyahu and the settlement movement that dominates it. The path the settlers and Netanyahu are charting is one of endless occupation, limitless settlement expansion, and creeping annexation of the West Bank. It's a path that is blind to the cost, to the long-term security, democratic nature, and Jewish character of the State of Israel that comes with seeking to control all of the land. So, in this moment of crisis, both Israel and the United States need courageous and principled political leadership that can meet these challenges head on. The political headwinds are strong. Our opponents are fierce and they are ruthless, and they mount swift and noisy attacks. The modern media environment has all but eliminated thoughtful discussion of issues and brought in its place a gladiatorial arena of childish tweets, name-calling, and whataboutism. But the threats and the challenges we face are far too important for us to throw up our hands and walk away in despair. Even though what brought us together in J Street is a specific and narrow concern about the future of the State of Israel, we understand well that the challenges we face are far greater. We run the real risk in the coming months of another war in the Middle East. Last decade, as those of us who were starting J Street sat together, one of our primary motivations was our regret that the Jewish community's institutional leadership failed to stand up against the war in Iraq. The 70% majority of Jewish Americans opposed to the war didn't have an organized and adequate voice in the political debate. Instead, our community was perceived by too many to be among the most hawkish influencing American foreign policy. And now, with this president assembling a war cabinet, surrounding himself with the likes of John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, and getting ready to jettison the Iran nuclear deal, we face another moment of truth. And this time, our community must not be silent. We must call loudly and clearly on Congress, stop a reckless and uninformed president from starting yet again down the path to war. The confrontation with Iran that the hawks in this country, in Israel, and in the Gulf seek will have horrific consequences, not just for the state of Israel, but for the entire Middle East and the world. And the threats posed by the present political leadership go well beyond the loss of the two-state solution and the shredding of the nuclear deal with Iran, well beyond the mandate of J Street. Climate change, non-proliferation, water and resource management globally, gun control, immigration, racial and social justice. Liberal democracy itself is at risk as the United States under Donald Trump abandons the vital role that it has played in the world, on the world stage, for the last 70-plus years. But what ties all these issues together, issue after issue after issue, is the need for political leadership that is willing to take risks, to challenge political orthodoxy, and to stand up, as Howard Dean said, for what is right. In this room tonight are dozens of members of Congress and the U.S. Senate, and a fair number of the candidates who are looking to join them. J Street exists. J Street exists to provide those of you strong enough and courageous enough to lead us in a different direction with the support that you need. The essence of J Street, the essence of what we honor here tonight, is that for the sake of our children, for the sake of our grandchildren, for the sake of the planet and all the people who live on it, we must stand up to the loud and powerful voices on the extremes and fight for what we know is right. Some of my friends like to call me an unrepentant optimist, because I do believe that we can change the course of history against forces that seem out of our control. But as I've said to many J Street groups over the years, when I'm asked if a glass is half full or half empty, I do not accept the question. I just want to know where the pitcher is so we can fill the glass up. I buy the notion that President Obama sold me, that we are the change we've been waiting for. It is on us to build the future that we want. I believe with all my heart that the success J Street has enjoyed in our first decade is only a precursor of the success that lies ahead in our second. Thank you for supporting our efforts to shape the future through J Street. I promise all of you that in our second decade, as in our first, we will meet this moment of challenge with the leadership and the urgency needed to bend the arc of history toward a more just and better future. Thank you.